Hi, today here at Pagan World News and Pagan World TV, we're representing Transgender Day of Remembrance. And I know a lot of you out there may not know what that is, so we brought in expert Sir Bryan Ellicot, head of the Order of Rainbow Tent of the Carolyn tradition, and also works in the New York City in a number of ways with the LGBT community. And welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so why don't you give us a little bit of what is TDOR? I guess sometimes it is for us that may not realize what it is.
Yeah, so TDOR, or Transgender Day of Remembrance, is a solemn event that we hold in the trans and gender non-binary and intersex community on November 20th every year to remember and pay our respects to those that we've lost in our community to violence, hate, and discrimination that has ultimately led to the loss of their lives. Every year, for the past several years, there's been over 300 members of our community across the world who have lost their lives to hate, violence, and bigotry. And this is our time of the year sort of to pay respects to them and also remind people that trans people exist and that we have human rights across this planet to exist, and that we're not trying to do anything but harm anyone and live our lives.
So can you offer to us where you're at in this? I mean, you do a lot of activism. They mentioned the Order of the Rainbow Tent. I like Rainbow Tribes, but this is about the Order of Rainbow Tent. Can you talk a little bit about your work in this?
So yeah, I've been a member of the Carolyn tradition for a very short time. But in all spaces, I come loud, proud, and authentic. And thanks to Salmus allowing me to co-head the Rainbow Tent with him, we re-erected it. And every Friday, the first Friday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we hold a conversation group on Zoom where just people who are like-minded members of the LGBT community come and hang out and share space and create queer magic together.
So why is this important to our community at this point? I mean, why is it important to the community in general? Americans important. Why should we remember individuals?
So I think, we're at a pivotal point where people's human rights are being affected in negative ways, not only across our country, but across the world, where people are being policed in unfair ways because of how they present themselves or their gender. And, right now we're going into, as you know, the Parliament of World Religions, and part of that is human rights. And part of that conversation is trans people and how trans people have been around forever, for centuries. And in other places, during other parts of time, trans people were actually held on higher platforms. They weren't seen as, the lower hanging fruit that needed to be gotten rid of. We were considered more divine. Which is very different from how we're seen now. So I think this is a pivotal time, both in the pagan community and in the secular community, that we raise awareness to the needs of trans people and how trans people are being treated. Primarily also when trans people are in minority groups, people of color, women, the rights of trans men when it comes to reproductive health, all of those things. But right now for TDOR, that is when we talk about those we have lost to violence from all of those things, the lack of understanding that has ultimately had people murdered or hurt.
So most people don't realize, I don't talk a lot about it, but my brother Kenneth, who died at just short of his 22nd birthday in the city of Chicago, was working at a club called Berlin, and he was an early member of the drag community. And I want to ask a little bit about that, but he was murdered on Thorndale L Station in the late night because he went home and he was a very young one, so he wore the bridal outfit and he was thrown in front of a train. And so he died because of that type of violence. So it affects me very personally. And even now, almost 40 years later, it affects me and that sort of acceptance. So it does affect a lot of people. So people always talk about transgender and drag, and there's a big confusion about what the difference is and where they're the same. Can you offer us a little bit of that?
Yeah, so I mean, trans people, there's trans, there's non-binary, there's intersex, and there's drag. I have a friend who is also a member of the non-binary community, who is a famous drag queen here in New York City, Marty G. Cummings. And they do drag and they are non-binary. So basically, when we talk about our community, we're talking about anyone who presents or articulates their gender outside of what they were assigned at birth. So that can be anyone, that could be people who choose to dress more androgynously, people who choose to dress more femininely, people in our community who just like to paint their nails. Some people consider that feminine. It's now become some, classy pop culture thing to like everybody paint their nails. So I think the difference, it's more about drag as an art form,
Mhm.
or it can be more than that to other people.
Okay,
It
that's
all
a
depends on the person.
and yeah. So I'm always in remember. It's made me kind of think of this last year has been really thinking about my brother Ken. He would have loved this community,
Mhm.
but he was never given that opportunity, and so that's a very difficult thing for that. So how should people respond? What can they do to honor this Tidor
There
Day?
are T-Door celebrations that I'm aware of in major cities all over the country. Chicago, there be some in Florida, New York City, California, everywhere. They're usually collected on a website. I'll make sure we get that to you before this airs.
Mhm.
Um, and then you know, I consider it sort of like very similar to how some people in our community do their Samhain ancestor work. I do some ancestor work usually on Tidor, specifically around our trans community, and some of our trans ancestors, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, um, people like that. So, you know, it's a time that you can reflect on trans people in their lives if you know one who's been affected by violence, or recommitting yourself to doing what you can to help trans people live full and authentic lives, whether that's donating to trans organizations, whether that's helping a trans person, through their degree work here at which school and through the Carillions, or, anything like that. Anytime you're helping a trans person or bettering someone's life, you're helping one less trans person go through having to be remembered on Tidor.
Now, let me offer a question I think is really important to people who are not used to dealing with this. I know I'm an older person, and I've had a rough time dealing with the change in pronouns,
Mm.
and I've accidentally misgendered people, and I usually try to apologize. What should we know about it? What can we do about that for people who are willing to accept it but are having a hard time wrestling with changing their language style?
So I would say each person deals with being misgendered differently.
Mhm.
I'm further along in my transition. I've been transitioning for over 10 years, very publicly with some very big public faces here in New York City. And people mess up all the time. It depends on the setting, how I take it. In a professional setting, I have to be professional, but every person is different. So don't apologize and make the whole world stop for it. Just like, if you're in a bigger space, apologize and just keep going with it. If the
Mhm.
person wants to talk to you about it, they'll talk to
Mhm.
you about it. I'm a big fan of just putting pronouns in front of my addresses when I'm on a Zoom call, or in my emails, even if I'm emailing, this person who knows. It takes practice. You're not going to get it right the first time. It takes a lot of work. Um, but just the person will be patient with you as long as they can see you try. I prefer to see people try than to just give up because they keep making mistakes. So I like to see progress over perfection.
I can understand that. Just like everything else, it is something that changes. So thank you for so much. So I think I have one more question. I think it's kind of important. We talk about allyship. We've talked about a lot of different ideas in the community, but where do you think that we need to do the most work? How can people who really want to help do the most good for the community, for the transgender community?
I think the thing that we need to do more of is just create spaces for trans people to feel included, um, everywhere, not just in the pagan community, but also when people are out doing their work. Trans people we're different, but we're not special. in the terms of like, we don't want to be treated better than anyone. We want to be treated equitably to everyone. And that can mean a lot of things depending on not only your gender, but your sexual orientation, your race, your ethnicity, your income level. So really it's opening doors for people in all the ways possible would make the lives of trans people better.
There you go. And that's something is. So is there anyone that you're remembering in particular this year?
This year there's been a lot of violence, but no one in particular this year. I've lost a lot of people previously. Years ago, there was someone murdered in Harlem Park, in the park here in Harlem, that I was a part of rallying around. And then, I'm here for community all year round. So, yeah.
And so check out the page we're going to set up for this. And thank you so much for being here, Sir Bryan Ellicot, and for being here and sharing that with us. We're grateful, and remember today, and enjoy, and let us hope that we can build a better world. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
Hello, my name is Reverend Mary Hawk. I am a special reporter for Pagan Nightly News, and joining me is Andrea A.D. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andrea.
Hi, Mary. It's wonderful to see you again.
And today we are talking about Transgender Day of Remembrance. And how long have you been living openly as transgender? Let me ask you that question first.
So I transitioned at 25 publicly, and I haven't looked back since then. I'm 42 as of last month, so 17 years now.
Wonderful. So what does it mean to you that we have to have a Transgender Day of Remembrance?
Trans Day of Remembrance is, for me, is kind of a day of mourning the loss of the members of the community that were killed by violence, and also, frankly, a bit of a day of rage as well, at the fact that that such a thing is even necessary, because our community is just so heavily hated on by some members of society out there that regardless of anything we're doing or not doing, that they want to kill us just for existing.
And that is really sad, and it is such a reflection of our society, and not a good reflection of our society.
Yeah, definitely not.
And have you personally lost any friends to violence?
I am privileged that I have not lost any of my friends to the direct violence that is more directly what the Trans Day of Remembrance is about. I have, of course, lost friends to self-harm, that oftentimes those folks were in depressive states largely because of the violence that we face, and the treatment that so often is pervasive against trans people.
And and even psychological violence is still violence.
Absolutely.
And that has to be stated. And what steps have you taken to protect yourself against the constant threat of violence?
Well, living in rural Middle Tennessee in 2016, after the events of that year, I and most of my household acquired handguns, and at least two of us, at the time, the two members of the household that are openly trans, or were openly trans at that point, rather, I should say, we acquired our own concealed carry permits.
And again, it's a shame that you feel like you have to go and do that. But living here in Middle Tennessee, I can't argue that it's not a necessary step for your safety and the safety of the rest of your household.
Oh yeah, especially whenever you've got a number of people who seem to be more and more less fringe for those that think like them, who like to threaten to harm people for the crime of just using the toilet.
And yes, and that is so sad. And I will just share from my own personal experience. The only time I have ever felt like someone was invading my privacy in a restroom, it was at a church camp, and the guys were sneaking in. I am sure I have shared public restrooms with trans women who were not invading my privacy.
Oh yeah, most of the time, frankly, at least I know for myself, especially the early days of transition, I was more concerned about getting myself in the toilet, plunked down to do my business, and getting the heck out of there as quickly and as quietly as possible, with doing the absolute minimum interaction or things that I needed to do appropriately in the bathroom.
Right. I have never heard anyone actually tell a credible story of any such thing happening either.
Yeah, I mean, the only time I've personally heard of any stories like that were usually activists who were against the idea of trans people being allowed to use the bathroom, choosing to claim to be that they were trans while invading the bathroom, the women's bathroom, or because it's almost always targeted at trans women because we so often tend to be very visible.
Yes, apparently no one is actually worried about trans men invading the men's room.
Yeah, frankly, yeah, it's mostly because when trans guys get, oftentimes when trans men are read in the men's room by people who are bigoted, they're the ones that get assaulted and harmed, and not by those bigots who just choose to enact whatever form of violence they want to try to, apparently in their mind, correct this behavior. Not, regardless of the fact that, not even thinking about the fact that if they were to insist that trans men need to use the women's room and that trans women need to use the men's room, that literally makes it easier for cis men to invade the women's room without even needing to go to the ridiculous steps of putting on a dress or like women's apparel, so that then they can just say that they're a trans guy, that they belong in there, and then they do whatever wrongness that they're there to do.
Yes, it's all very strange and makes no sense.
Yeah, phobias often don't make sense, frankly, because they're irrational. That's what they are.
Well, I don't see this as a phobia. This is just out and out bigotry.
Right, absolutely. But like transphobia and homophobia, that it stems from irrational, fear, and honestly, I don't hate to. I'm gonna quote Master Yoda here. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And I mean that's where it all comes from. So like they are afraid because they don't understand things, and then they just kind of progress on if nothing is ever done to correct that negative thinking.
And you're absolutely correct. Well, is there anything you want to say to wrap things up?
For my cis counterparts out there, educate yourself. If you can, become a friend to a trans person, because we always, everybody out there needs more friends, and it's frankly hard to find allies as a trans person just out there. that's not to say that, you should force yourself upon them as friends or whatever, but be kind at the end of the day, no matter what. Be kind. And if you hear someone that saying something hateful about somebody that's trans, shut them down. Tell them, point out where they're wrong. And ideally, if you've managed to find a good source out there, show them why it is they're wrong. Provide them the education that they are clearly lacking because they're going to bias sources.
Those are good words. Be kind, folks. Treat each other gently. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Mary. It was a pleasure to be here.
And this is Reverend Mary Hawk, special reporter for Pagan Nightly News.
And welcome to our continued coverage of the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And today, and right now, we're talking with Rachel Crandall-Crocker, LMSW, and also the founder of Transgender Visibility Day. We're going to find more about that later. But first, can you tell us what, as I've now learned the abbreviation TDOR is used a lot with the Transgender Day of Remembrance, and what that's about?
Okay. It's our day to remember our trans brothers and sisters who were killed just for being trans. And unfortunately, there's an awful lot of them. TDOR was founded by Gwen Smith as a way to remember a friend of hers who was killed. And it became an international thing. We have to remember a lot of people have given their lives just so we can live our lives how we are living them right now. In a ceremony, they read the names, and often they talk about how each person was killed. And that really is sad.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were shot. Some people were killed with rocks, knives, run down by cars. It really happens a lot just because they are trans. And it's a very sad holiday, if you want to call it a holiday. However, it's a very important day. These people must be remembered.
So I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I think when we talk about holiday, I think it's really, this is only in the Day of Remembrance, and that's original root of holiday is holy day, is a day that you keep holy.
Oh, I like that.
That's where the word holiday comes from, is holy days. And I think that in that sense, it's not a one for celebration so much as for remembrance. So
Thank you.
And that's, that sort of thing. So let me ask you on the next step. So it is a day to remember people whose lives have been taken, sacrificed, brought to an early end. And it
Right.
affects everybody. I have my own story. Believe it or not, it affects more people than you think. And I do that. Do you have any remembrances or anything that what is your personal feelings or anything that you've experienced during these days?
Well, I experienced a lot of anger. I'm really angry during these days. Also, I'm angry that it could happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm scared. That's how I feel. I'm really sad. However, I'm really happy that this day exists. We have to remember forever. And because of Remembrance Day, we will. Every year in November is Remembrance Day. And I encourage people out there to go to one of the ceremonies. They're all over. There is one near you. And to go there and help to remember. These people lived, and we must always remember them.
That which remembers lives is one of the great things we speak in our pagan community. That which remembers lives.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
It is the idea that we, and it comes out of more of the Latin and South Americans, the idea of the three deaths. And we want to make sure the third death never happens. The first death is when we learn we're mortal. That happens sometime in our childhood and learns, oh my God, we're mortal. That's our first death. Our second death is our physical end. And our third death is when no one speaks our name ever again. The last time somebody speaks our name. And this helps. Huh? Yes. That's
Cool.
Lord Gonzalez taught me that. A great witch out of Chicago taught me that.
Really? Wow.
And so the Day of Remembrance allows them to continue to live because their names are not forgotten. And I think that often happens is that we don't want to forget the physical face, the human face behind these things. And so in that, how as allies, as people know, I'm an ally. I try my best. I've asked a lot of questions, but how best can we help, not just the Day of Remembrance, but the entire community live a safer life, I guess we're looking for, because this is about safety, about being able to live your life. How could we help?
Help to educate people.
Mm-hmm.
Help to tell them, I know trans people and they're just like us. To let people know that we are human exactly like everyone else. People tend to talk about us only like we are a concept. We aren't a concept, we're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as people realize that, there will be a lot more people on our side. So educate people. there are some wonderful websites out there. I will plug my own website, transgendermichigan.org. If you want to learn more about it. Also, we have a helpline. If you know of anyone who needs it, or you can call just to ask a question.
And we will be putting this into our notes so that you can find it.
Okay, great.
So as I was saying before the show, and I mentioned a lot of the people who are watching want to be better allies, but they have not had exposure to this community. And you've given us a lot of great answers. But there's another day, and you're the founder of the International Transgender Day of Visibility, which happens in March. Can you tell us about that? Because this sounds a lot more popular. Day of Remembrance is a day for remembering those who've come, but visibility is about, sounds like for everybody.
Yes, it is. It is. And I founded in 2009. Day of Remembrance is really important. However, I always thought that we needed another day. We needed a day that we could be proud and where we could come together as a world. We are all over the world. And a lot of things have happened as a result. New laws in countries have been passed as a result of Visibility Day.
That must feel wonderful to have an impact like that.
Oh my God, it does. It does. I almost can't believe that I'm the one who started it.
Isn't that, it is an unusual feeling. And it shows that, so you when you started it, you didn't have any idea of where it was going to go.
No, it was, I knew that we needed it. And I had a feeling that I was not the only one who felt that way. And that's exactly why it caught on. Lots of people were feeling that way. I waited for someone else to start it. And I waited and I waited, and finally I said, okay, I'll start the thing.
Absolutely. Sometimes you have to be the person who starts the spark. I've now become a little bit of a Vic lighter in my days, lighting people up. But you started out as a match. Can you tell us a little bit about that first day, that the first year that you celebrated it back in 2009? What was that like?
It did not catch on yet worldwide. However, there were a number of events, and I created the panel, and I contacted trans leaders all over the world. And I said, I am starting this and we want you to be involved. And within a few years, it was everywhere. It's even in countries where it's against the law to be trans. However, it's still there. It's in Africa. It's even in Russia. Very quietly, though. It's everywhere.
I can understand that. So one last question. So a lot of younger people are confused. They don't know if they're transgender, or they do know they're transgender and can't seem to get help, or they don't know, or they're confused about it all and just want, some answers. And especially with so many of these ideas of sexuality coming out, they drown in information sometimes. The internet is good for drowning you. What is a way that they could possibly connect and get help to answer their questions? We got you. Hmm?
Well, one way is the helpline.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a national trans helpline. However, we were the first. Websites, books, everyone, you can contact me. And they will have a way of contacting me, right?
Absolutely. We got your site, transgendermichigan.org. We'll put down that into the notes. And so people can contact, we'll put the help hotline number in our notes.
Okay.
That is what we're here to do today, is to kind of reach out, offer some education, and to help people remember.
Okay. Hey, I want to add, being trans, at least for me, is not a choice. I always knew I was actually a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Ask me how I knew.
How did you know you were a woman?
I have no freaking idea.
There we go.
I just always knew I was really a girl.
And people don't realize we know a lot of things. How do we know? For me, I have actually, I was ambidextrous when I was a kid, and I was beaten out of my left hand.
Yes.
So because I would pick up, because they said that wasn't, and it sounds so crazy. And this is a much bigger issue, a much more personal issue, but they beat me out of my left hand. Both my parents were left-handed, and I was somewhat that, but because that was different, and that's ridiculous, that sort of thing. So, and I'm not trying to compare the two. I'm just only saying that people make these ridiculous answers to things that are just built in. And like you said, you don't know why you felt that way, but you knew that was true.
Right. Ever since I can remember anything, I knew I was actually a girl. I tried to come out to my parents when I was 8. Let's just say that did not go very well. And I went back in the closet for 25 years.
Wow.
So it isn't easy for a lot of us. There's a lot of loss involved. I lost family members. I lost almost all my friends. I lost my job. I lost my marriage. I lost my house. It isn't easy.
And today, would you say that it was worth it making to live in that authentic life for you?
Oh my God, yes. eventually my counselor told me if I did not come out, I probably would end up killing myself. And that was not an okay option for me.
Fair enough. We're very glad that you're still here today. Talk with us.
People can be involved with Visibility Day any way that they want. As an ally, you can create an event, a conference, a coffee, arrange for a building to be lit up in the trans colors. Have a ribbon wearing campaign. And if someone asks, why are you wearing the ribbon? You could tell them all about Visibility Day. Lots and lots of ways.
Well, thank you so much. And this November 20th is the day this year many rituals are occurring for Transgender Day of Remembrance, as you know, and so we'll be continuing to cover this today, and we're so grateful, Rachel, that you came and spent time with us. And you can contact her at transgendermichigan.org, find the hotline, look in the notes, and continue the work. We really appreciate you doing this work. Thank you.
Oh, sure. And thank you for educating me.
Oh, good. I'm always glad to do that. And so everyone, we continue with our coverage, and thank you, Rachel. And let us remember those who have passed. Is there anyone in particular that you want us to remember?
I had a real good friend who actually killed herself. And I'm remembering Vanessa.
And remember, that which remembers lives. Thank you.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to further conversations as we explore this space for all of our audience.
Oh, wonderful.
Blessed be.
Thank you. Blessed be.
Imagine your life was in danger on a daily basis simply for being who you are. Imagine suffering discrimination not only in the workplace, but also in your school, in your church, your coven, your grove or circle, or in your own family, or even when you visit your healthcare provider. If you can imagine this, then you have a good understanding of what most transgender people endure on a daily basis. Hi, I'm Dr. Charleton Hall. I'm a retired family therapist and current director of the Mindful Ecotherapy Center. For most of my career, I was an LGBTQ ally, and I still work as a volunteer for transgender issues. Did you know that in 2019, 26 Americans lost their lives due to transgender violence? These victims were killed by acquaintances, partners, and strangers, and other people, some of whom have been arrested and charged, but others are yet to be identified. Some of these cases involve clear anti-transgender bias, In others, the victim's transgender status may have put them at risk in other ways, such as forcing them into unemployment, poverty, homelessness, or survival sex work, and even sex trafficking. Of the victims murdered, 80% were people of color, 55% were transgender women, and 50% were transgender women of color. Transgender women survivors of hate violence were also more likely to experience police violence, physical violence, discrimination, harassment, sexual violence threats, and intimidation compared to those who are not transgender women. Violence and harassment were experienced by more than 6,000 transgender people across a variety of contexts, including educational settings, at work, in interactions with police and with family members, at homeless shelters, accessing public accommodations, and in jails and prisons. Additionally, murders of transgender people often go unreported, and the identity of transgender murder victims is often misreported, so actual numbers are probably far higher. So what can you do? You can start by calling attention to local victims of anti-transgender violence. Highlight positive stories of transgender individuals and the dehumanizing discrimination that they have faced in their daily lives. Familiarize yourself with statistics on transgender violence and make your community aware. Statistics from the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, or GLSEN, show that in schools, 16.2% of transgender students report being physically assaulted as a result of their gender expression, while 32.5% experience physical harassment, including bullying and physical assault. To help with this matter, you can talk with transgender youth about their experiences growing up and create educational networks to fight such discrimination. Contact local transgender and LGBTQ organizations to find out how they plan to observe the Transgender Day of Remembrance. Many universities and high schools, through their Gay Straight Alliance and other organizations, hold candlelight vigils or other events to recognize the day. You can also get involved in a local event or start one of your own. Here are some types of events to look for. Candlelight vigils are the most common way that local communities recognize the Transgender Day of Remembrance, and such events may also include marches, forums and panel discussions with local advocates and authorities, poetry or spoken word readings, art exhibits, movie screenings featuring films or documentaries that center on transgender characters or subjects, representations of the number of transgender people murdered, such as tombstone cutouts, memorials with photographs, or chalk outlines. To learn more about what you can do, you can visit some of the resources currently being listed on your screen. If you are a transgender person who has experienced discrimination, contact one of these organizations listed here for a list of resources and support in your area. And remember, having a transgender child doesn't mean you failed as a parent. Rejecting your transgender child means you failed as a parent. If you are currently feeling suicidal or know someone who is, contact the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-TALK. That's 800-273-8255. Or you can dial 988 on your smartphone. And remember, together we can make a difference.